When Madison Fletcher got locked in the wrestling room at Riverside High, her tormentors thought they'd found the perfect way to humiliate the quiet girl who always kept her head down. What they didn't know was that Madison had been waiting 3 years for someone to push her too far. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Madison Fletcher had perfected the art of invisibility at Riverside High School. At 17, she had mastered the precise timing needed to slip through hallways unnoticed, the exact angle to hold her textbooks to shield her face, and the strategic seating arrangements that kept her away from the popular crowds. Radar. Her thick-rimmed glasses, oversized hoodies, and habit of speaking barely above a whisper had earned her a reputation as the school's resident wallflower. The move to Riverside 3 years ago had been devastating for Madison. Her father's job transfer from their small town in Montana to the sprawling suburbs of Phoenix had ripped her away from everything familiar. Back in Whitefish, she'd been just another face in a graduating class of 32. Here at Riverside, with its 3,000 students and cutthroat social hierarchy, she felt like a minnow thrown into a shark tank. What made it worse was that Madison's family had practically vanished after the move. Her older brother Jake had enlisted in the Marines right after helping them relocate, and her parents, both emergency room doctors, worked opposite shifts at Phoenix General. Most days, Madison came home to an empty house, ate dinner alone, and fell asleep to the sound of her own breathing. The bullying had started small. Whispered comments about her thrift store clothes, deliberate shoulder bumps in the hallway, the occasional accidentally spilled drink on her backpack. Madison had learned to endure it silently, believing that any reaction would only make things worse. She kept her head down, focused on her grades, and counted the days until graduation. But Chloe Brennan had other plans. Chloe was everything Madison wasn't: tall, blonde, confident, and cruel in the way that only comes naturally to someone who's never faced real consequences. As the daughter of Riverside's biggest real estate developer and captain of the varsity cheerleading squad, Chloe commanded respect through fear and social status. Her inner circle consisted of her Lieutenant Brittany Walsh, a sharp-tongued girl who did Chloe's dirty work, and Tyler Morrison, the quarterback whose good looks were matched only by his complete lack of empathy. The escalation began on a Tuesday morning in October. Madison had been rushing to her locker before the first period when she accidentally bumped into Chloe, causing the popular girl to drop her designer coffee. The liquid splattered across Chloe's pristine white sneakers shoes that probably cost more than Madison's entire wardrobe. "Are you kidding me right now?" Chloe's voice carried across the hallway, drawing stares from nearby students. "These are limited edition." Madison's face burned with embarrassment as she bent down to help clean up the mess. "I'm so sorry, I didn't see you there. I can pay for them to be cleaned, or with what money?" Brittany sneered, appearing at Chloe's side like a loyal attack. "Dog, look at those shoes she's wearing. I think my little sister had the same pair in 3rd grade." The crowd of onlookers grew larger, phones appearing to capture Madison's humiliation. She could feel her chest tightening, her breathing becoming shallow. This was exactly the kind of attention she'd spent 3 years avoiding. "You know what?" Chloe's voice had taken on a dangerously sweet tone. "Don't worry about it, Madison. These things happen to clumsy people. It's not like you can help being ... you." The words stung more than any physical blow could have. Madison gathered her books and hurried away, but she could hear the laughter following her down the hall. That incident marked the beginning of what Chloe would later call her Madison Project. Over the following weeks, the harassment became systematic. Chloe and her friends would arrive at Madison's lunch table just as she sat down, forcing her to find somewhere else to eat. They'd whisper just loud enough for her to hear when she passed, making comments about her appearance, her clothes, her lack of friends. Tyler started a game where he'd pretend to ask Madison to homecoming, only to laugh and walk away when she looked up hopefully. The psychological warfare was expertly crafted. Nothing was ever quite serious enough to report to teachers, but it was constant enough to make Madison dread coming to school. Her grades, once her only source of pride, began to slip as she found it harder to concentrate. Sleep became elusive as she lay awake replaying each humiliation, wondering what fresh torture tomorrow would bring. Madison's parents, when they were around, noticed something was wrong but couldn't quite put their finger on it. Her mother would ask if everything was okay at school, and Madison would nod and change the subject. How could she explain that she was being slowly destroyed by a campaign of casual cruelty? How could she admit that she was too weak to fight back? The truth was, Madison wasn't weak at all. But she carried a secret that made fighting back seem impossible, a secret that connected her to a past she'd tried desperately to leave behind. Before the move to Phoenix, before the transformation into Riverside's invisible girl, Madison Fletcher had been someone entirely different. In Whitefish, she'd been known by a different reputation altogether. But that was a lifetime ago, when she was 12 years old, and the world made more sense. Her father, Dr. Michael Fletcher, had been a volunteer coach for the local youth wrestling program. What started as a way for Madison to stay busy after school had evolved into something much more significant. Under her father's guidance, and with the help of Coach Rodriguez, a former collegiate wrestler, Madison had discovered she had a natural talent for the sport. Wrestling had given awkward, bookish Madison a place where her size didn't matter, where her quiet intensity became an advantage. On the mat, she wasn't the doctor's daughter or the shy kid who preferred books to parties. She was a competitor, and she was very good. By the time she was 14, Madison had won 3 state championships in her weight class. She'd learned to read her opponents, to use their momentum against them, to find the split-second openings that determined victory or defeat. More importantly, she'd learned that physical confrontation wasn't about anger or aggression. It was about control, technique, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. But the move to Phoenix had changed everything. Riverside High didn't have a girls' wrestling program, and Madison's parents were too busy establishing their new medical practices to look into club teams. Wrestling became another piece of her old life that she'd packed away, along with her confidence and her sense of self-worth. Now, 3 years later, as Chloe Brennan's campaign of torment reached new heights, Madison found herself thinking more and more about those days on the mat. Sometimes, late at night, she'd practice moves in her empty bedroom, muscle memory guiding her through takedowns she hadn't used in years. But in the harsh light of day, faced with Chloe's perfectly manicured cruelty, those skills felt like relics from someone else's life. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon in November. Madison had stayed after school to make up for a chemistry test she'd missed due to a particularly brutal morning encounter with Chloe's crew. The hallways were mostly empty as she made her way to her locker, looking forward to the weekend's reprieve from her tormentors. She should have known better than to let her guard down. Well, look who's still here. Chloe's voice echoed off the empty hallway walls. She was flanked by Brittany and Tyler, their faces wearing the expressions of predators who'd cornered their prey. Madison's hands trembled as she fumbled with her combination lock. "I was just leaving." No, Brittany said, stepping closer. "We've been looking for you. We heard you missed the first period this morning because you were crying in the bathroom." "Is that true, Madison?" The accusation wasn't far from the truth, which made it sting even more. Madison had spent the morning's break hiding in a bathroom stall, trying to compose herself after finding her locker vandalized with cruel messages written in permanent marker. "Leave me alone," Madison whispered, her voice barely audible. Tyler laughed. "Did you guys hear something?" "I thought I heard a mouse squeaking." "You know what your problem is, Madison." Chloe moved closer, her voice taking on the tone of a concerned friend. "You're forgettable. You walk through these halls like a ghost, and honestly, most people don't even know you exist. You're just nothing. The words hit Madison like physical blows. She kept her eyes fixed on her locker, willing herself not to cry in front of them. But her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't work the combination. "Oh my God, are you crying?" Brittany's voice was filled with mock concern. "Chloe, I think we made her cry." "That's actually kind of sad," Tyler added. "Like, pathetically sad." Madison finally got her locker open and grabbed her backpack, desperate to escape. But as she turned to leave, Chloe stepped directly into her path. "You know what? I have an idea," Chloe said, her eyes lighting up with malicious inspiration. "There's something we want to show you. A little surprise we've been working on." Before Madison could react, Tyler had grabbed her backpack and slung it over his shoulder. "Come on, Madison, don't be rude. We went to all this trouble for you." They herded her down the hallway like a sheep being led to slaughter. Madison's mind raced, trying to figure out how to escape, but she was outnumbered and cornered. The smart thing to do was comply and hope they'd get bored quickly. They led her through the main corridor, past the trophy cases and school spirit banners, toward the athletic wing of the building. Madison's stomach dropped as she realized where they were taking her, the wrestling room. Riverside High's wrestling program was one of the most successful in the state, and their practice facility reflected that success. The room was spacious, with regulation mats covering most of the floor and mirrors lining the walls. Equipment was neatly organized on shelves, and championship banners hung from the ceiling. It was also completely empty on a Friday afternoon, with the team away at an out-of-town tournament. "Welcome to your new home," Chloe announced with theatrical flair as they pushed Madison into the center of the room. "We thought you might like to spend some quality time here. You know, really get to know the place." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Madison's confusion turned to horror as she watched Tyler pull out a padlock and chain from his backpack. "What are you doing?" "Well, the wrestling team is gone until Sunday," Brittany explained cheerfully. "And the janitors don't clean this room on weekends. So you'll have plenty of time to think about your life choices." They were going to lock her in for the entire weekend. "You can't do this," Madison said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Someone will look for me," Chloe laughed. "Who? Your parents who work all the time? The friends you don't have? Face it, Madison, if you disappeared tomorrow, it would take weeks for anyone to notice." The cruel truth of those words settled over Madison like a weight. Her parents wouldn't be home until late Sunday night. She had no close friends to check on her. The wrestling room was in a section of the school that was rarely used on weekends. She could die here, and no one would know. As Tyler began securing the chain around the door handles, Madison felt something inside her chest begin to crack. It wasn't her heart breaking, it was something else. Something that had been dormant for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to emerge. "This is assault," she said quietly. "Kidnapping. False imprisonment. Prove it," Chloe shot back. "It's your word against ours. Who do you think they'll believe?" The door clicked shut. The chain rattled as Tyler secured the padlock. Through the small window, Madison could see their faces, Chloe's satisfied smirk, Brittany's cruel glee, Tyler's indifferent shrug. "Don't worry," Chloe called through the door. "We'll tell everyone you went home sick. Have a great weekend, Madison." Their laughter echoed down the hallway as they walked away, leaving Madison alone in the wrestling room that would serve as her prison. For the first few minutes, she stood frozen in the center of the mat, processing what had just happened. Then, the panic set in. She ran to the door, pulling at the handles, shouting for help that wouldn't come. She checked every window, but they were too high and too small to provide escape. Finally, exhausted from her futile attempts, Madison sank to her knees on the wrestling mat. The familiar texture beneath her hands brought back a flood of memories, the smell of the mats, the feel of the warm-up exercises, the controlled aggression of competition. And slowly, as the reality of her situation settled in, Madison Fletcher began to remember who she used to be. The shy girl who'd been terrorized for 3 years was still there, but underneath, something else was stirring. Something that had been buried under layers of fear and self-doubt, waiting for the right moment to surface. Madison looked around the wrestling room at the equipment, the mats, the mirrors that reflected her small, frightened form. This was supposed to be her prison, but as she sat there in the growing darkness, she began to see it differently. This wasn't a prison. This was a training ground. And Madison Fletcher had work to do. The first hour was the hardest. Madison had explored every inch of the wrestling room, testing doors that wouldn't budge, examining windows that offered no escape, and screaming until her throat was raw. The silence that followed her desperate calls for help was deafening, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic from the parking lot. As darkness settled over the school, the automatic lights flickered on, casting harsh shadows across the empty mats. Madison sat with her back against the mirrored wall, hugging her knees to her chest, trying to process the reality of her situation. No food, no water, no way out until Monday morning at the earliest. But as the hours passed, something unexpected began to happen. The panic that had initially consumed her started to ebb, replaced by a cold, calculating anger that she hadn't felt in years. Madison found herself studying the room with new eyes, not as a prison but as a space filled with possibilities. The wrestling mats were regulation size, clean and well-maintained. Along the walls, equipment racks held practice gear, headgear, wrestling shoes in various sizes, knee pads, and training dummies. A whiteboard displayed the team's upcoming match schedule and technique diagrams. Everything she needed to remember who she used to be was right here. Madison stood up slowly, her joints stiff from sitting on the floor. She approached one of the mirrors and stared at her reflection. The girl looking back at her was pale, thin, and frightened, nothing like the confident wrestler she'd once been. But underneath the oversized hoodie and baggy jeans, her frame still carried the muscle memory of countless hours of training. She pulled off her hoodie and examined herself more critically. 3 years of inactivity had softened her, but the foundation was still there. Her shoulders retained their width, her core still had definition, and her legs, despite being hidden under loose clothing, were stronger than they appeared. Madison walked to the center of the mat and dropped into a wrestler's stance. The position felt foreign at first, her body protesting the unfamiliar posture. But as she moved through the basic motions, level changes, penetration steps, sprawls, muscle memory began to take over. She started with simple drills, working through the fundamental movements that had once been as natural as breathing. Footwork patterns, hip tosses, basic takedowns against imaginary opponents. Her body was rusty, uncoordinated, but with each repetition, pieces of her former self began to emerge. The first night was brutal. Madison's muscles, unused to the demands she was placing on them, screamed in protest. Her hands, soft from years of holding books instead of gripping opponents, quickly developed blisters. But she pushed through the pain, driven by a fury that had been building for 3 years. By dawn, she had worked through dozens of techniques, her body reacquainted with movements she'd thought were lost forever. She was exhausted, dehydrated, and sore, but for the first time in years, she felt like herself. Saturday brought new challenges. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and her mouth felt like sandpaper from dehydration. But Madison had discovered something during the night that changed everything. A small maintenance closet in the corner of the room contained a utility sink with running water. It wasn't much, but it would keep her alive. More importantly, the closet also contained something else. Old wrestling magazines and training manuals left behind by previous teams. Madison devoured them, studying technique breakdowns, training regimens, and competition strategies. She found detailed diagrams of advanced moves she'd never mastered, conditioning routines designed for peak performance, and mental preparation. Techniques used by elite athletes. As Saturday wore on, Madison's training intensified. She practiced against the heavy bags, working on her striking and conditioning. She used the resistance bands to maintain her strength training. Most importantly, she began to work on the psychological aspects of wrestling: visualization, mental toughness, and the killer instinct that separated good wrestlers from great ones. The mirrors became her opponents. Madison would study her reflection, identifying weaknesses in her stance, flaws in her technique, hesitations in her movements. She practiced reading body language, looking for the subtle tells that would telegraph an opponent's next move. She worked on her poker face, learning to hide her intentions while reading others. But the most important transformation was happening inside her mind. With each passing hour, the scared, submissive girl who had endured 3 years of torment was being replaced by someone harder, more focused, and infinitely more dangerous. Madison began to analyze her tormentors with the same clinical precision she'd once used to study wrestling opponents. Chloe was the leader, but leadership made her predictable. She was used to having her way, accustomed to backing down only when faced with superior social status. She was physically imposing, but had never been in a real fight. Her power came from manipulation and social dynamics, not physical confrontation. Brittany was the follower, cruel but ultimately cowardly. Remove Chloe from the equation, and Brittany would crumble. She was the type who could dish out abuse, but couldn't handle having it turned back on her. Tyler was the wild card. As a football player, he had size and strength advantages, but football conditioning was different from wrestling conditioning. Football players were trained for short bursts of explosive power, not the sustained grappling and endurance that wrestling demanded. More importantly, football players were used to having teammates, referees, and rules. Wrestling was more primal, more personal. By Saturday night, Madison had developed a comprehensive understanding of each of her tormentors' strengths and weaknesses. She knew their schedules, their habits, their social circles. She understood the power dynamics that kept their group together, and the pressure points that could tear them apart. But knowledge alone wouldn't be enough. She needed to be ready physically. Sunday's training was focused on combat applications. Madison worked through scenarios, practicing techniques that would be effective in real confrontations, rather than regulated matches. She studied joint locks, pressure points, and submission holds that went beyond traditional wrestling. The training manuals contained sections on self-defense applications, techniques designed to neutralize larger, stronger opponents through leverage and precision rather than brute force. She practiced using her environment, learning to create opportunities and advantages from everyday school situations. How to use locker doors, stair railings, and classroom furniture to her benefit. How to control space and positioning to negate size disadvantages. How to end confrontations quickly and decisively. As Sunday evening approached, Madison realized she had undergone a complete transformation. The girl who had entered this room 3 days ago no longer existed. In her place stood someone harder, more focused, and infinitely more capable. She had also made a decision about what would happen when she got out. For 3 years, she had endured Chloe's campaign of psychological warfare, believing that staying invisible was her best defense. But invisibility hadn't protected her, it had made her a target. Compliance hadn't earned her peace, it had invited escalation. Madison understood now that there was only one language Bullies truly understood: consequences. Monday morning couldn't come soon enough. She spent Sunday night in meditation, a technique she'd learned from the wrestling manuals for pre-competition mental preparation. She visualized the coming confrontation, running through multiple scenarios and responses. She practiced controlling her breathing, her heart rate, her emotional state. She prepared herself for what was to come. As dawn broke on Monday morning, Madison heard the familiar sounds of the school coming to life. Buses arriving, car doors slamming, the distant chatter of students entering the building. Soon, very soon, her captors would return to gloat over their victory. They expected to find a broken, defeated girl cowering in the corner. Instead, they were about to discover that they had awakened to something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. Madison Fletcher was ready for war. She positioned herself in the center of the wrestling mat, directly in line with the door. When they opened it, she would be the first thing they saw. Not cowering, not begging, not broken, standing ready. The sound of footsteps in the hallway grew closer. Madison could hear Chloe's distinctive laugh, probably discussing how pathetic Madison would look after 3 days of imprisonment. The footsteps stopped outside the door. "I bet she's curled up in a little ball, crying." Brittany's voice was muffled but audible through the door. "This is going to be so good," Tyler added. "We should record it." Madison smiled a cold, predatory expression that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who knew the older. Let them bring their phones. Let them record what was about to happen. The whole school could watch what happens when you push Madison Fletcher too far. The chain rattled as Tyler worked on the padlock. Madison controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate steady. Everything she had trained for in the past 3 days led to this moment. The lock clicked open. The chain fell away. The door began to swing inward, and Madison Fletcher stepped forward to reclaim her life. The door swung open, and Chloe Brennan stepped inside with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences. Her perfectly styled blonde hair caught the fluorescent light as she surveyed the wrestling room, expecting to find Madison broken and defeated in some corner. Instead, she found her standing in the center of the mat. "Well, well," Chloe said, though her voice carried a note of surprise. "Look who survived her little vacation. How was your weekend, Madison? Did you have time to think about?" She stopped mid-sentence. Something was different about Madison Fletcher, though Chloe couldn't immediately identify what. The shy girl was still there, same glasses, same plain features, but something in her posture had changed. She stood straighter, more centered. Her usual hunched shoulders were squared, and her hands hung loose at her sides instead of clutching nervously at her sleeves. Most unsettling of all were her eyes. Gone was the fearful, darting gaze that had defined Madison for 3 years. Instead, she looked directly at Chloe with an intensity that was almost predatory. "Hey," Brittany called from behind Chloe, trying to peer over her shoulder. "Why isn't she crying? She should be crying by now." Tyler pushed past both girls, his phone already recording. "This is perfect. Look at her just standing there like..." He never finished the sentence. Madison moved with a speed that caught all 3 of them off guard. In one fluid motion, she closed the distance between herself and Tyler, grabbed his outstretched wrist, and twisted. The phone clattered to the floor as Tyler found himself face down on the mat, his arm locked in a position that sent lightning bolts of pain up to his shoulder. "What the hell?" Chloe shrieked, taking a step backward. Madison applied just enough pressure to make Tyler gasp, then released him and stepped back to the center of the mat. Tyler scrambled to his feet, clutching his wrist and staring at her in shock. "Did she just..." Brittany's voice was barely a whisper. 3 days, Madison said quietly. Her voice had changed too. Gone was the trembling whisper they were used to. This voice was calm, controlled, and carried an undertone of steel. 3 days you left me in here. Did you really think I'd spend that time crying?" Chloe quickly recovered her composure, though her face had gone pale. "You psycho. You can't just attack people. Tyler, call security. Call the police. She assaulted you." Tyler was still flexing his wrist, his face a mixture of pain and humiliation. "I'm fine," he muttered, though he kept his distance from Madison. "No," Madison said, taking a step forward. "You're not fine. And after today, none of you will be. Fine. You see, I've had 3 days to think about what you've done to me. 3 days to plan what comes next." There was something terrifying in her calm delivery. This wasn't the hysterical breakdown they had expected. This was calculated, controlled, and infinitely more dangerous. "You're crazy," Brittany stammered. "We were just playing around. It was a joke." Madison's laugh was cold and humorless. "A joke? Locking someone in a room for 3 days without food or water is a joke. Let me tell you what's funny. You three actually thought you were the predators in this relationship." She began to circle them slowly, and instinctively, they found themselves backing toward the wall. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that they were responding to her movements like prey animals. "You want to know what I learned about you, Chloe?" Madison's voice never rose above conversational level, but somehow that made it more menacing. "You're a coward. Your entire identity is built on other people's fear, but you've never actually faced someone who wasn't afraid of you." Chloe's mask of confidence was cracking. "Shut up. You don't know anything about me. I know that your daddy's real estate empire is being investigated by the state attorney general for fraud. I know that your perfect boyfriend cheated on you with your best friend last month. Yes, Chloe, everyone knows about Derek and Jessica. I know that your eating disorder landed you in the hospital last year. And I know that underneath all that makeup and designer clothing, you're just as scared and insecure as everyone else." Chloe's face went white. "How did you, 3 days in a room with nothing but time and a smartphone with internet access, gives you plenty of opportunity to research." Madison lied smoothly. She had actually learned most of this information through careful observation and overheard conversations. But the implication that she had been actively investigating them was far more unsettling. She turned to Brittany. "And you, the faithful follower, do you know what Chloe says about you when you're not around? How does she call you useful but boring? How she's planning to drop you the moment she gets to college?" "That's not true," Brittany said weakly. But her eyes darted to Chloe for confirmation. "Tyler," Madison continued, not waiting for Chloe's response, "the star quarterback with the full ride to state, except your GPA is barely above 2.0, and your SAT scores were so bad that your parents had to make a very generous donation to keep that scholarship. How long do you think it'll take the college to figure out that you're functionally illiterate?" Tyler's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "You little freak, I'll..." He took a step toward her, but Madison didn't retreat. Instead, she shifted into a wrestling stance so naturally that it looked like breathing. "You'll what, Tyler? Hit me? Please do. I've been looking forward to this for 3 years." There was something in her eyes that made Tyler freeze. This wasn't the scared little mouse they had been tormenting. This was something else entirely, something that looked like it would welcome violence. "You're all wondering what changed," Madison said, straightening out of her stance. "You're trying to figure out how 3 days turned me from your victim into something you're actually afraid of. The truth is, nothing changed. I was always this person. I just chose not to show you." She walked over to the equipment rack and picked up a pair of wrestling shoes. "See, before we moved to Phoenix, I had a different reputation. I was a 3-time state champion wrestler. I held the record for fastest pin in my weight class. Do you know what that means?" She sat down and began lacing up the shoes, her movements casual and unhurried. "It means I know exactly how to take down someone twice my size. It means I understand leverage, pressure points, and how to cause maximum pain with minimal effort. It means that for 3 years, I've been allowing you to torture me." The shoes fit perfectly. Madison stood and tested her footing on the mat. "But that stops today." "This is insane," Chloe said, though her voice was shaking now. "You can't threaten us. We'll report you." "Report me for what? Self-defense?" Because that's what this is going to be called when you corner me, and I have to protect myself. Madison smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Of course that's assuming any of you are stupid enough to actually try something. She walked over to Tyler's dropped phone and picked it up. The device was still recording. Actually, this is perfect. Thank you for documenting your breaking and entering, false imprisonment, and conspiracy to commit assault. I'm sure the police will find this very interesting. Delete that, Tyler demanded, reaching for the phone. Madison held it away from him effortlessly. I don't think so. This is evidence. Evidence of 3 days of kidnapping, actually. In Arizona. That's a Class 3 felony. Prison time, Tyler. Real prison, not juvenile detention. The three bullies exchanged panicked glances. They had never considered the legal implications of their actions. Here's what's going to happen, Madison continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone dictating terms. You're going to leave me alone, completely alone. No more comments, no more games, no more psychological warfare. You're going to pretend I don't exist. And if we don't? Chloe asked, though her defiance sounded hollow. Madison's smile widened. Then you'll discover just how creative I can be with everything I learned about you over the weekend. Did you know that cyberbullying is also a felony in Arizona? Especially when it involves sharing private information about someone's medical conditions or family financial problems. She began counting on her fingers. False imprisonment, conspiracy, assault, cyberbullying, harassment, stalking. I could probably get all 3 of you expelled and criminally charged. Your college applications, your scholarships, your futures all gone. The wrestling room fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. The 3 students who had entered, expecting to gloat over their victim, now found themselves completely outmaneuvered. But I'm feeling generous, Madison continued. So I'm going to give you a choice. Walk away now, leave me alone, and we can all pretend this never happened. Or, she let the word hang in the air like a threat. Or what? Brittany whispered. Madison's expression went cold. Or I show you exactly what 3 years of suppressed anger looks like when it finally gets released. She took a step forward, and all 3 of them flinched. Choose wisely, she said softly, because this is the only chance you're going to get. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Chloe, her face pale and her hands trembling, turned toward the door. This isn't over, she said, but her voice carried no conviction. Yes, Madison replied calmly. It is. As the 3 bullies filed out of the wrestling room, Tyler still clutching his wrist and Brittany shooting fearful glances over her shoulder, Madison remained standing in the center of the mat. She had won this battle, but she knew the war was far from over. Bullies like Chloe didn't give up easily, and humiliation would only make them more dangerous. But for the first time in 3 years, Madison Fletcher wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready for it. Madison spent the rest of Monday morning in a strange state of hyper-awareness. Every sound in the hallway made her turn. Every glimpse of blonde hair made her tense. Every whispered conversation felt like it might be about her. The confrontation in the wrestling room had changed everything, but she wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Her first period chemistry class passed in a blur. She sat in her usual back corner seat, but instead of shrinking into her hoodie, she found herself scanning the room, cataloging exits, identifying potential allies and threats. Mrs. Henderson droned on about molecular structures, but Madison's mind was elsewhere, running through scenarios and contingencies. The real test came at lunch. For 3 years, Madison had eaten alone in various hiding spots around the school, empty classrooms, the library, sometimes the bathroom when things got particularly bad. But today, she walked directly into the main cafeteria and claimed a table near the center of the room. The reaction was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as students noticed the school's most invisible girl sitting openly in their territory. Phones appeared, capturing the anomaly. Madison could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but for the first time, the attention didn't make her want to disappear. She unwrapped her sandwich methodically, aware that Chloe's usual table had a direct line of sight to her position. She could see Brittany gesturing frantically, probably describing the morning's events. Chloe sat rigidly, her jaw clenched, clearly struggling with how to respond to this public challenge to her authority. Then Jessica Martinez sat down across from her. Madison looked up in surprise. Jessica was a junior, captain of the debate team, and generally considered one of the more sensible, popular kids. They had never spoken, though Madison had always admired Jessica's quick wit during class discussions. "Interesting choice of seating," Jessica said casually, opening her yogurt. "Very bold." Madison studied her carefully. "Is this the part where you deliver a message from Chloe?" Jessica laughed, a genuine sound that drew more stares. "Please, I wouldn't run errands for Chloe Brennan if she paid me. I'm here because the school is buzzing about some kind of showdown this morning, and you look like the only person who knows what actually happened. What are people saying? Depends who you ask. Tyler's telling everyone you attacked him unprovoked. Brittany's claiming you threatened to hurt them. But here's the interesting part. None of them are demanding consequences. No trips to the principal's office, no calls for suspension, which tells me there's more to this story." Madison took a bite of her sandwich, considering how much to reveal. "What's your theory?" "My theory is that 3 bullies finally picked on someone who turned out to be more dangerous than they expected. My theory is that you've been hiding something for a long time, and whatever happened this morning was your coming out party." Jessica was sharper than Madison had realized. "And what if you're right? Then I want to know if you're accepting applications." "For allies." The statement caught Madison off guard. "Why would you want to be my ally?" "Because Chloe Brennan has had this school under her thumb for too long, and someone who can make her flinch is someone worth knowing." Jessica leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Also because I've seen what she's done to you for 3 years, and I'm tired of pretending it's not my problem." Before Madison could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance to the cafeteria. Derek Lawson, Chloe's ex-boyfriend and the student body president, was striding purposefully toward their table. He was trailed by 2 of his football teammates, creating exactly the kind of public scene that would force Madison to respond. "Fletcher," Derek called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet cafeteria, "we need to talk." Madison didn't. "Stand up. About what?" Derek stopped a few feet from their table, his teammates flanking him in what was clearly meant to be an intimidating formation. "About you putting your hands on my friend Tyler. About you threatening my ex-girlfriend. About you thinking you can just terrorize people without consequences." The cafeteria had gone completely silent. This was theater, Madison realized, a public display designed to force her back into her place. Derek was offering Chloe a way to save face by positioning himself as the reasonable authority figure. "Terrorize people?" Madison repeated, her voice calm. "That's an interesting choice of words. Tyler told me what you did. Unprovoked assault, threatening behavior." "Derek," Jessica interrupted, "you might want to get the whole story before you." "Stay out of this, Martinez," one of Derek's teammates snapped. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually," Madison said, standing slowly, "it concerns everyone in this room. Because what happened this morning wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the ending." She looked around the cafeteria, addressing the crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation. "For 3 years, I've been the target of a systematic campaign of harassment. Verbal abuse, social isolation, vandalism of my property, and finally false imprisonment. This weekend, Chloe Brennan and her friends locked me in the wrestling room. From Friday afternoon until Monday morning. No food, no water, no way out." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several students pulled out their phones, recording what was clearly becoming a major drama. "That's ridiculous," Derek said. But his voice had lost some of its certainty. Why would they do that? Ask them, Madison replied. Better yet, ask Tyler why he was recording when they opened the door this morning. Ask him why they haven't reported my supposed assault to any teachers or administrators. Ask yourself why 3 people who claim to be victims are working so hard to keep this quiet. Derek's confidence was visibly wavering. He hadn't expected Madison to go public, to turn this into a trial by social media. The truth is, Madison continued, her voice carrying clearly across the silent cafeteria, I defended myself. And apparently, that was so shocking to my tormentors that they're now trying to paint themselves as the victims. Prove it, called out a voice from the crowd. Madison couldn't see who had spoken, but the challenge hung in the air. Madison smiled. Gladly. She pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. Within seconds, phones throughout the cafeteria began buzzing with notifications. Madison had just sent a group message to every contact in her phone, which included most of her classmates thanks to various group projects over the years. I just sent you all a video, she announced. Tyler was kind enough to record the whole encounter this morning. Watch it and decide for yourselves who the real victim is. The cafeteria erupted into chaos as students opened the message. Madison could hear fragments of the video playing from dozens of phones, her calm voice explaining the legal consequences of false imprisonment, Tyler's panicked attempts to grab his phone, Chloe's threats falling apart in the face of Madison's evidence. Derek's face went pale as he watched the video on his own phone. The footage clearly showed 3 students entering a room where they had obviously locked someone, Tyler immediately starting to record as if documenting their victim's humiliation, and Madison defending herself against what appeared to be a planned harassment session. Holy shit, someone whispered loud enough to be heard. She actually did lock her in there. 3 days? That's kidnapping. Look at Chloe's face when she realizes she's being recorded. Did she just threaten to destroy them? The social media wildfire was immediate and devastating. Within minutes, the video was spreading beyond the cafeteria, beyond the school, beyond their local community. #Riverside Reckoning began trending as students shared their own stories of Chloe's bullying, their own experiences with the toxic culture that had allowed this to happen. Derek stood frozen, realizing he had just been manipulated into giving Madison the perfect platform to expose everything. His attempt to publicly humiliate her had backfired spectacularly. This is insane, he said weakly. You can't just destroy people's lives over some high school drama. You're right, Madison replied, but they already destroyed mine. Unjust. Returning the favor. Principal Roberts appeared at the cafeteria entrance, clearly alerted by the commotion. His face was grim as he surveyed the scene, hundreds of students glued to their phones. The obvious tension between Madison and Derek's group. The buzz of conversation that stopped abruptly when they noticed his presence. Miss Fletcher. Mr. Lawson, my office, now. As they walked toward the exit, Madison could hear the conversations resuming behind them, more animated than before. Jessica caught up with them in the hallway. That was either brilliant or completely insane, she said. Quietly. Both, Madison replied. Definitely both. But as they approached the principal's office, Madison felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. Going public had been a calculated risk, but she knew that surviving the immediate social media storm was just the beginning. The real consequences, legal, academic, personal, were still coming. The shy girl who had walked into that wrestling room on Friday afternoon was gone forever. But Madison wasn't entirely sure yet who was taking her place. She was about to find out. Principal Roberts held his office door open, his expression unreadable. After you, Miss Fletcher. I think we need to have a very long conversation. Madison squared her shoulders and walked into the office, ready for whatever came next. Behind her, she could hear the cafeteria still buzzing with excitement, the sound of a social order being turned upside down. The revolution had begun. Now came the hard part. Surviving it, Principal Roberts closed the door to his office with a decisive click that seemed to seal Madison's fate. His office was a shrine to educational bureaucracy, diplomas on the walls, motivational posters about leadership, and a desk cluttered with forms that probably determined students' futures with the stroke of a pen. Derek immediately launched into damage control mode. "Sir, I want to be clear that I had nothing to do with whatever happened this weekend. I was simply trying to address what appeared to be threatening behavior toward other students." Madison remained silent, studying Principal Roberts carefully. She had never been in his office before. 3 years of invisibility had kept her off the administrative radar entirely. But she knew his reputation: fair but inflexible, more concerned with maintaining order than seeking truth. "Miss Fletcher," Roberts said, settling behind his desk, "I've received some very serious allegations about your conduct this morning. Before we discuss the consequences, I'd like to hear your version of events." "Which events specifically?" Madison asked. "The part where I was kidnapped and held prisoner for 3 days, or the part where I defended myself when my captors returned to gloat?" Derek shifted uncomfortably. "That's exactly the kind of inflammatory language, Mr. Lawson," Roberts interrupted. "You'll have your turn to speak." "Miss Fletcher, those are serious accusations. If what you're claiming is true, why didn't you contact authorities immediately upon your release?" Madison had anticipated this question. "Because I was in survival mode, sir. After 3 days without food or adequate water, my priority was getting out alive. Besides, I had evidence." She pulled out her phone and showed him Tyler's video, which had captured not just the confrontation, but also clear audio of the 3 bullies discussing their weekend project and expressing satisfaction with their handiwork. Roberts watched the video twice, his expression growing more grave with each viewing. When it finished, he set the phone down carefully and looked at Derek, whose face had gone ashen. "Mr. Lawson, were you aware of this incident when you confronted Miss Fletcher in the cafeteria?" "No, sir. I mean, I knew there had been some kind of altercation, but Tyler said she attacked him without provocation. I was just trying to—" "You were trying to publicly intimidate someone who had just escaped from what appears to be a serious crime," Roberts said coldly. "Did it occur to you to get the facts before staging that confrontation?" Derek had no answer for that. Roberts turned back to Madison. "Miss Fletcher, while I understand you were defending yourself, your methods this morning were problematic. Distributing that video to the entire student body, creating a public spectacle, was necessary," Madison finished. "Sir, I've been reporting incidents of harassment for 3 years through proper channels. Every complaint was dismissed as teenage drama or social conflict. The system failed me completely. So yes, I went public. Because apparently, that's the only way to get anyone's attention." The principal's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the display and grimaced. "Excuse me for a moment." He answered with a terse, "Roberts here," and listened for several minutes, his face growing more troubled with each passing second. Madison caught fragments. Channel 12 News, viral video, district superintendent. When he hung up, Roberts looked like a man who had just watched his career prospects evaporate. "Miss Fletcher, your video has been picked up by local news outlets. We have reporters in the parking lot asking about our anti-bullying policies. The district office is demanding immediate answers about how 3 students were able to commit what appears to be felony kidnapping on school property." Madison felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with apprehension. She had wanted consequences for her tormentors, but she hadn't anticipated the scope of what she had unleashed. "I need to ask you directly," Roberts continued. "Do you intend to press criminal charges?" The question hung in the air like a sword of Damocles. Madison realized that her answer would determine not just the fate of Chloe, Brittany, and Tyler, but potentially the entire administration's handling of the situation. "That depends," she said carefully, on what happens next. Before Roberts could respond, his secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. "Sir, there are parents here demanding to see you. The Brennans, the Walshes, and the Morrisons. They seem upset." Roberts closed his eyes briefly, probably calculating how much worse this day could get. "Send them to conference room B. Tell them I'll be with them shortly." He looked at Derek. "Mr. Lawson, you're dismissed. And I suggest you spend some time reflecting on the difference between leadership and mob intimidation." Derek left without another word, probably grateful to escape before the situation deteriorated further. "Miss Fletcher," Roberts said once. They were alone. "I'm going to be frank with you. This situation is spiraling beyond anyone's control. We have potential criminal charges, media attention, and 3 sets of very influential parents who are likely preparing lawsuits. I need to understand what outcome you're looking for." Madison had been thinking about this question for days. "I want accountability. Real accountability, not just empty apologies and sensitivity training. I want policies that actually protect students instead of protecting the school's reputation. And I want assurance that what happened to me never happens to anyone else. And if the school commits to those changes, then maybe we can resolve this without involving the courts." Roberts nodded slowly. "I'm going to ask you to wait here while I speak with the parents. Deputy Martinez from the school resource program is on his way to take your statement. Whatever you decide about pressing charges, we need an official record of these events." As Roberts left for the conference room, Madison found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time since the morning's chaos began. Through the office window, she could see news vans setting up in the parking lot, reporters checking their equipment, the buzz of a story that was growing beyond her control. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Chloe just got pulled out of class crying. Brittany threw up in the bathroom. Tyler's nowhere to be found. You broke them." Another text, this one from an unknown number. "You're my hero. Anonymous freshman who finally feels safe." Then another, "Way to ruin people's lives over stupid high school drama. Hope you're proud." And another, "Finally someone stood up to those psychos. Thank you." The messages kept coming, a mixture of support, condemnation, gratitude, and rage. Madison realized she had become a symbol for something much larger than her personal revenge. Students who had been silently suffering were finding their voices. Others who had benefited from the existing power structure were pushing back. Deputy Martinez arrived 20 minutes later, a soft-spoken man in his 40s who treated Madison with a combination of professional detachment and obvious sympathy. Taking her statement was a methodical process, documenting every incident of harassment over 3 years, establishing a timeline of the weekend's events, reviewing the evidence she had gathered. "This is textbook false imprisonment," he said, after reviewing Tyler's video for the 3rd time. "Combined with the pattern of harassment you've documented, we're looking at multiple felony charges if you decide to proceed. What would happen to them depends on their age, prior records, and the prosecutor's discretion. But we're talking about potential jail time, permanent criminal records, and civil liability. These aren't pranks anymore. They're serious crimes." Madison nodded, filing away the information. The power to destroy her tormentors' futures was now literally in her hands. Deputy Martinez closed his notebook. "I need to tell you something off the record. I've been working in schools for 15 years, and I've seen hundreds of bullying cases. Most victims never fight back. They just endure it until graduation. What you did took courage, but it also took calculation. You documented everything, gathered evidence, and chose your moment perfectly." He paused, studying her carefully. "That level of strategic thinking is impressive. It's also a little scary. I hope you use that kind of intelligence responsibly." After he left, Madison sat alone in the principal's office, surrounded by the growing storm she had created. Through the walls, she could hear raised voices from the conference room, angry parents demanding answers, administrators scrambling for solutions, the machinery of institutional damage control grinding into motion. In a few hours, her parents would be called. The media attention would intensify. Lawyers would get involved. Her simple act of self-defense had triggered a cascade of consequences that would reshape not just her life, but the lives of everyone involved. For 3 years, Madison Fletcher had been powerless. Now she wielded enough power to destroy her enemies completely. The question was, what kind of person was she going to choose to be? Outside, the news crews were setting up for the evening broadcast. By tomorrow, her story will be everywhere. The shy girl who fought back against her bullies would become a national symbol of justice or revenge, depending on who was telling the story. Madison stared out the window at the gathering media circus and realized there was no going back. The invisible girl was gone forever. In her place stood someone far more dangerous. Someone who understood exactly how much damage the truth could do when wielded with precision. The Fletcher family home had never hosted a war council before. But that's exactly what Tuesday evening felt like. Madison sat at the kitchen table surrounded by people who would determine her future. Her parents, Dr. Michael and Dr. Sarah Fletcher, their attorney Janet Morrison, no relation to Tyler, and Deputy Martinez, who had volunteered to explain the legal landscape on his own time. The house itself reflected the organized chaos of 2 emergency room physicians' medical journals stacked on every surface, coffee cups abandoned mid-crisis, and the persistent smell of hospital soap that seemed to follow doctors everywhere. Neither of Madison's parents had slept more than 4 hours since Deputy Martinez's phone call the previous evening. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Dr. Sarah Fletcher said, her surgeon's precision evident in every word. "Our daughter was held prisoner for 3 days, and now we're discussing whether she should face consequences for defending herself." Janet Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in education law, held up a hand. "It's more complicated than that, Sarah." Madison's response, while understandable, has created a perfect storm of legal and public relations issues. Dr. Michael Fletcher looked haggard, the weight of 3 years of missed signs clearly crushing him. "We should have seen this. All those nights she came home quiet, all those headaches that kept her in her room. How did we miss that our daughter was being tortured?" "You were saving lives," Madison said quietly. "Both of you every day. I made the choice not to tell you because I knew how much pressure you were already under." Deputy Martinez cleared his throat. "If I may, the immediate issue isn't blame, it's decision-making. The district attorney has reviewed the case, and she's prepared to file charges against all 3 students involved in the imprisonment. But she's also concerned about Madison's methods of retaliation." "Retaliation?" Dr. Sarah's voice carried the edge that usually preceded her dressing down incompetent residents. "She exposed criminal behavior. Since when is telling the truth considered retaliation?" "Since it was weaponized for maximum damage," Janet replied. "Madison didn't just report the crime. She orchestrated a public humiliation campaign that destroyed 3 teenagers' reputations and potentially their futures. From a legal standpoint, that creates complications." Madison had been silent through most of the discussion, but now she leaned forward. "What kind of complications?" "The Brennans have hired Maxwell and Associates, the most expensive law firm in Phoenix. They're claiming their daughter is the victim of a malicious prosecution campaign. They're threatening to sue you, the school district, and anyone who shared that video for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress." "Based on what?" Dr. Michael asked. "Based on the argument that their daughter made a mistake, a serious one, but a mistake nonetheless, and you've turned her into a national symbol of evil through selective editing and social media manipulation." Madison felt a chill. Selective editing? The video shows exactly what happened. "But it doesn't show the 3 years leading up to it," Janet explained. A good defense attorney could argue that you were the aggressor in a long-term conflict, that you deliberately provoked this incident, and that the imprisonment was a panicked overreaction rather than calculated cruelty. Deputy Martinez nodded grimly. They're also claiming that your wrestling background makes you a trained fighter, which could reclassify your physical response as assault with a deadly weapon. That's ridiculous, Dr. Sarah snapped. She's 17 years old and weighs 110 pounds. In Arizona, martial arts training can legally qualify as a deadly weapon in certain circumstances. If they can prove Madison deliberately used her wrestling skills to harm Tyler, the charges against her become much more serious. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Madison's brilliant counterattack was being turned into evidence of premeditation and excessive force. There's more, Janet continued reluctantly. The media attention has attracted some unsavory elements. Madison's social media accounts have been flooded with both support and death threats. Someone leaked your home address online. And there's a group called Justice for Chloe that's planning a protest at the school tomorrow. Madison's phone buzzed with another notification. She had stopped reading them hours ago when the messages became too overwhelming. Hundreds of friend requests, interview requests from national news shows, and threats that ranged from crude to genuinely terrifying. What about the other side? Dr. Michael asked. Surely people can see that our daughter was the victim here. Oh, there's plenty of support, Deputy Martinez said. Anti-bullying organizations are hailing Madison as a hero. There's a Team Madison hashtag trending with over 2 million posts. The problem is that the internet doesn't do nuance. You're either a victim or a villain, with no middle ground. Madison's mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Honey, what do you want to do? This is your decision. Madison had been wrestling with that question for hours. The logical part of her brain understood that pressing charges would likely result in justice. Chloe, Brittany, and Tyler would face real consequences for their actions. But it would also mean months of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and the risk of her own prosecution if their counter-arguments gained traction. Can I ask you something? Madison said to Deputy Martinez. If I don't press charges, what happens? To them, the school will handle it administratively. Probably suspension, maybe expulsion depending on the district's policies. But no criminal record, no jail time, no permanent consequences. And if I press charges? Best case scenario for them? Plea bargain down to misdemeanors, community service, probation. Worst case? Felony convictions, juvenile detention until they turn 18, then adult prison. And civil liability that could bankrupt their families. Madison closed her eyes, trying to process the enormity of the choice. 3 days ago, she was nobody. Now she held the power to either destroy her tormentors or grant them mercy, and either choice would define not just their futures, but her own. There's something else you need to consider, Janet said gently. The college admissions aspect. This story is now part of your permanent internet footprint. Every school you apply to will know about this incident. Some will see you as a survivor and an advocate. Others will see you as a troublemaker who escalated conflicts into legal battles. The same is true for them, Dr. Sarah pointed out. Yes, but they're claiming to be reformed. Chloe's parents have already enrolled her in therapy and community service. They're crafting a narrative about a troubled teenager who made mistakes but is committed to growth and redemption. That plays well with admissions committees. Madison laughed bitterly. So she gets to be the victim of her own cruelty? Welcome to public relations in the social media age, Janet replied. The truth matters less than the story people want to believe. A knock at the front door interrupted the conversation. Through the window, Madison could see a news van parked across the street, its satellite dish extended. Another reporter looking for an exclusive interview with the girl, who had captured the nation's attention. Dr. Michael went to answer the door while the others waited in tense silence. They could hear muffled conversation, then his firm voice, saying, "No comment. Please respect our family's privacy." When he returned, his expression was grim. Channel 7 News. They wanted to know if Madison would be available for a live interview tomorrow morning. Apparently, Chloe's family is doing the morning show circuit, telling their side of the story. What are they saying? Madison asked, though. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. Janet pulled out her tablet and scrolled through news articles. The narrative is evolving. Chloe is being portrayed as a victim of cyberbullying who made one terrible mistake and is now facing disproportionate consequences. Her parents are emphasizing her volunteer work, her academic achievements, and her plans to become a pediatric nurse. She scrolled further. They're also highlighting your wrestling background and suggesting that you were always the real threat, a trained fighter who manipulated events to justify violence against smaller, weaker girls. Madison felt the familiar rage building in her chest, the same cold fury that had sustained her through 3 days in the wrestling room. Smaller and weaker? Chloe is 5 inches taller than me and has 15 pounds on me. Physical size doesn't matter in the court of public opinion, Janet said. What matters is perception. And right now, they're winning the perception battle. Deputy Martinez leaned forward. Madison, I need to tell you something that might influence your decision. We've been investigating this case further, and we found evidence that this wasn't an isolated incident. There are at least 4 other students who were targets of similar campaigns by this group. One attempted suicide last year. The room went dead silent. We also found evidence that they've been planning escalations. Text messages discussing ways to break you. Conversations about how to make your life not worth living. This wasn't just bullying. It was a systematic campaign designed to cause maximum psychological damage. Madison's parents exchanged horrified glances. This was worse than they had imagined. If you press charges, Deputy Martinez continued, we can potentially protect future victims. If you don't, they'll likely just find new targets once this media storm dies down. Madison stood up abruptly, needing space to think. She walked to the kitchen window and stared out at the news van, at the reporters who were turning her life into entertainment, at the suburban street that no longer felt like home. Behind her, the adults continued their discussion of legal strategies and public relations damage control. But Madison was thinking about something else entirely, about the anonymous freshman who had texted her gratitude, about the 4 other victims Deputy Martinez had mentioned, about all the future Madisons who might benefit from her choice. She turned back to the table. Her decision was clear. I need to know something first, she said. If I press charges and this goes to trial, can I control the narrative? Can I make sure people understand what really happened? Janet nodded slowly. It would be risky, but yes. A trial would allow us to present the full scope of their harassment campaign. We could call witnesses, present evidence of the pattern of abuse, and show that your response was proportional to the threat you faced. And if I don't press charges, then their version becomes the dominant narrative. The story becomes about a cruel teenager who destroyed innocent kids' lives through social media manipulation. Madison took a deep breath. She had learned a lot about power in the past few days, how to claim it, how to wield it, and now, how to choose when to use it. Then I guess we're going to trial, she said quietly. The war was just beginning. 6 months later, Madison Fletcher stood outside the Maricopa County Courthouse, no longer the invisible girl who had once haunted the halls of Riverside High. The pause. Legal proceedings had transformed her in ways she never could have anticipated, not just into a symbol of resistance against bullying, but into someone who understood the true weight of justice. The trial had been a media spectacle that captivated the nation for 3 weeks. Every day brought new revelations about the systematic nature of the harassment campaign, the school's failures to protect students, and the complex psychology of teenage cruelty. The prosecution had built an airtight case, presenting evidence of not just Madison's imprisonment, but of a coordinated effort to psychologically destroy multiple students over several years. Chloe Brennan, Brittany Walsh, and Tyler Morrison had all entered plea agreements rather than face the full weight of a jury trial. The terms were significant, but not devastating: 2 years of probation, community service specifically related to anti-bullying programs, mandatory counseling, and restitution to their victims. More importantly, they were required to participate in a restorative justice program that brought them face to face with the students they had tormented. But the real victory hadn't been in the courtroom. The Riverside School District had implemented the most comprehensive anti-bullying policies in Arizona, largely based on recommendations that emerged from the investigation into Madison's case. 3 administrators had been transferred or demoted for their failure to address the harassment patterns. The district had hired full-time counselors specifically trained in identifying and addressing systematic bullying. More significantly, Arizona had passed legislation dubbed Madison's Law, which specifically criminalized the type of social media harassment and coordinated psychological abuse that had nearly destroyed her. The law provided clear definitions of cyberbullying, established mandatory reporting requirements for school personnel, and created legal pathways for victims to seek both criminal and civil remedies. Madison had testified before the state legislature. During the bill's consideration, her composed and articulate presentation becoming one of the most watched CSPAN clips in years. The shy girl who had once struggled to speak above a whisper now commanded attention in rooms full of lawmakers and advocates. But perhaps the most important change was personal. Madison had discovered that her voice, once found, was powerful beyond anything she had imagined. College recruiters from across the country had reached out, not just impressed by her academic record, but by her advocacy work. She had accepted a full scholarship to Stanford University, where she planned to study both law and psychology, with the goal of becoming a prosecutor specializing in crimes against children. The wrestling program at Stanford had also offered her a spot on their team. 3 years of missed training couldn't erase natural talent, and the story of her background had attracted the attention of coaches who saw potential in someone who understood the mental aspects of competition as deeply as the physical ones. Standing on the courthouse steps, Madison reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. The media attention had eventually faded, replaced by new scandals and outrage cycles. Chloe, Brittany, and Tyler had finished their senior year at different schools. Their college plans significantly altered, but not destroyed. They were rebuilding their lives, hopefully with a better understanding of the consequences of their actions. Jessica Martinez approached, still Madison's closest friend and now the president of Riverside Student Council. Ready for this? Today marked the opening of the Madison Fletcher Center for Student Advocacy, a facility funded by donations that had poured in from across the country after Madison's story went viral. The center would provide counseling, legal resources, and support for students facing harassment or abuse. More importantly, it would train young people to become advocates for their peers, breaking the silence that allowed bullying to flourish. "I still can't believe this is real," Madison admitted, looking at the modest building that would house the center. 6 months ago, I was nobody. Now there's a building with my name on it." "You were never nobody," Jessica replied. "You just weren't ready to show the world who you were." The ceremony was small and meaningful rather than grand. Local officials spoke about the importance of student advocacy. Dr. Martinez, now the district's director of student wellness, presented the results of the first semester under the new policies. Reported incidents were up significantly, but resolved complaints were up even more dramatically. Students were finally speaking up because they believed someone would listen. Madison's parents were there, both having taken rare time off from the hospital. The past 6 months had been transformative for their family as well. The crisis had forced them to confront their own neglect, not malicious, but real nonetheless. They had restructured their schedules to ensure one parent was always available, and family dinners had become sacred time, protected from the demands of their medical practices. But the person Madison was most proud to see was Ashley Chen, a sophomore at Riverside, who had become the center's first success story. Ashley had been targeted by a group of seniors who were trying to replicate Chloe's methods on a new victim. But instead of suffering in silence, Ashley had reported the harassment immediately, using the new protocols that Madison's case had helped establish. The situation had been resolved within days. The perpetrators faced real consequences, and Ashley had become a peer advocate herself. The thing that nobody talks about, Madison told the small crowd gathered for the ceremony, is that bullying doesn't just hurt individuals, it creates a culture where cruelty becomes normal. When we accept that some people deserve to be tormented, we're all diminished. She paused, looking out at faces that included former classmates, teachers, and community members who had rallied around the cause. But when we decide that everyone deserves dignity, that every voice matters, that silence is not an option, that's when real change happens. After the ceremony, Madison found herself standing alone in the center's main room, surrounded by resources that would help students who found themselves in situations similar to her own. Posters displayed hotline numbers, legal rights, and step-by-step guides for reporting harassment. Computers provided access to online support groups and educational materials. But the thing she was most proud of was the wrestling mat in the corner of the room. It wasn't for competition, it was for therapy. Madison had worked with counselors to develop a program that used physical activity, including basic wrestling techniques, to help students build confidence and learn to defend themselves. The mat represented something more than self-defense. Training. It was a place where young people could discover their own strength. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Miss Fletcher, I'm a freshman at a school in Ohio. I saw your story online, and it gave me courage to report what was happening to me. The bullying stopped. Thank you for showing me that I didn't have to be invisible. Messages like that arrived regularly. Now, from students across the country who had found their own voices after hearing Madison's story. Each one reminded her that the worst period of her life had become the foundation for something larger than herself. As Madison prepared to leave the center, she caught her reflection in one of the windows. The girl looking back at her was confident, purposeful, and unafraid. She wore her strength openly now, no longer hiding behind oversized hoodies and downcast eyes. The transformation was complete, but it hadn't been about revenge or even justice in the traditional sense. It had been about refusing to accept that cruelty was inevitable, that victims were powerless, that silence was safety. Madison Fletcher had learned that the most dangerous person in any room was someone who had nothing left to lose. But she had also learned something more important. The most powerful person in a room was someone who used their strength to protect others. As she walked out of the center that bore her name, Madison smiled at the irony of it all. Chloe Brennan had set out to make her invisible, to erase her from the social landscape of Riverside High. Instead, she had created someone unforgettable, someone who would spend the rest of her life making sure that no other student would ever have to choose between invisibility and survival. Someone who had learned that true power came not from the ability to hurt others, but from the courage to stand up and say, "This stops here, this stops now. This stops with me." The shy girl was gone forever. In her place stood an advocate, a survivor, and a force for change. Madison Fletcher was finally, truly visible, and she would never disappear again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.